So let me first turn to Her Excellency, Madam President Amina Gurib-Fakim, to make some brief remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurie. Did you want me to introduce myself again? I think you did a great job already. So let's go past the formalities. First of all, congratulations are in order for the fantastic book that Landry keeps doing. And as you have rightly said, Laurie, I don't know when he has time to write all these books, because I follow him on Twitter. He's all over the world, and yet he still manages to produce some fantastic, of course, very, very scholarly work. Again, congratulations, Landry, for this great work. And you have rightly put in your book some key features as to what Africa needs to do to proceed in order to emerge. Now we are now COVID, because one thing that I appreciated in the book when you wrote about, the Economist writing this headline, Africa, the hopeless continent, and 10 years later coming up with another headline, Africa, the rising continent. Now, what has made this transition? Now, I always like to situate Africa history, Africa economic history, or political history over a span of 60 years. Because before this, we were under, of course, a different kind of powers that were present. And I see the emergence of Africa coming for the past 60 years. So I think for the past 60 years, we have done tremendous progress, if you see from that lens. Immediately after, the departure of the colonial powers, we used to have, generals and our heads of armies at the helm of the countries. And now, as you have rightly said in your book, we are seeing more bureaucrats, we are seeing more professionals, we are seeing more scientists coming at the helm of the countries, and the narrative has changed. But in spite of the change of this narrative, we are seeing that the fear on the continent, because of our recent 60 years history, is that there is still the fear that when new partners are coming to join us, we are fearful that we're going to witness another scramble for Africa. So what we hope to see increasingly, be it with China, India, and all the partners who are still operating on the continent, we want to see greater partnership. Greater partnerships, especially in this age of post-COVID, because we are going to see a contraction of the economy of the continent, of the sub-Saharan Africa especially, for at least 10%. And this will not spare anyone. So we are seeing contraction 7 to 10% of the economy, and with all that goes with it. But I think what the COVID has done to us, and not just to Africa, but I think the rest of the world, it has revealed many of our weaknesses. And one big weakness that we have seen is how the manufacturing sector and the entire supply chain has been disrupted, especially when we look at just one sector, the health sector, because we're talking about the COVID-19, the PPE, and also the API in the pharmaceutical sector, how we are so dependent on China and India in terms of manufacturing of our medication. I think recently the US has also come to terms with that. So how are we going to emerge out of this? And one thing that we have rightly taken on board is the Africa Free Trade Agreement, because here we are hoping that we'll see a better integration of the continent, because right now it's at a really poor 20% or less than 20% in terms of trade. So we are hoping that post-COVID, and of course with the CFTA, that we'll see deeper integration, maybe reaching up to what EU is doing at 70% integration. So this, of course, will be the ultimate aim. So what we are hoping to see emerging is more manufacturing, because when we see more manufacturing, we'll see, of course, more innovation, which will come up, more transformation of African raw material. And unfortunately, many of our leaders have not understood that we need to keep on transforming Africa's good. Now, one example I took from Akina Desina, the African Development Bank head, is that how come when Starbucks coffee, the price is going up, or a chocolate is going up in price, the Africa farmer hardly gets anything back. So these are things that we are increasingly aware of, and these are things that we will have to put on the table if we are going to look at partnership. So this is what I want to highlight, is that Africa has to go for more transformation. Africa has got to go for more manufacturing. Africa has to go for more agriculture-based industry, because we are sitting on a $1 trillion business. The food sector will never go out of business. The health sector will never go out of business. The digital sector we have to invest in, because this is really what we have seen emerging during the COVID. And these are plenty of green shoots there. And of course, it goes without saying that infrastructure and construction will all be there. So this is my take initially on this debate, and I'm sure there'll be more questions that we can answer eventually. Thank you so much.
Now, let me turn to some questions for both of you. Madam President, what should African governments do to unlock Africa's economic potential and the business potential in order to accelerate post-COVID economic recovery on the continent? This will be very critical. You're still on mute.
Yes. Yes,
there you are.
Thank you. It may seem paradoxical, because I've just said that the continent and several countries, they're going to be witnessing a contraction of the economy. And I think yet this is the time now to invest. And to invest in the youth, to invest precisely as Woko has said, in the manufacturing sector, because we still need the infrastructure, and to invest in quality standards, because if we are going to see emerging trade across the continent, we're going to have to see a kind of acceptance of the norms, and we all want quality. And one thing that I must also say, and this I think calls for greater partnership between the US and African countries, is through medicine. And we have seen that, unfortunately, in Africa, so many medicines and antibiotics and all these which are traded, which are, of course, substandard or fake. And so this is something that we need to promote in terms of the quality of medicine. So we need to invest in, in the widest sense of the word, in the entire infrastructure. And I think the development of the continent will emerge at the nexus of empowering the youth through entrepreneurship. We need to invest in them as well. We need to invest also in social safety net. And this has emerged really, really drastically, not just in Africa, but elsewhere in the world, where the poor have been left really to fend for themselves with nothing to fall back on. So these are issues that we have to see emerging: investment in the widest sense of the word, in the youth, in the women, in agriculture, in medicine, in the infrastructure, in IT, because I think in IT we're going to leapfrog. We don't need the infrastructure as it has been the case 30 years ago. And now with the new technologies, with, of course, access, and we have seen Walk as well, talking about investment in that space. So I think when we start investing in all these, that very soon we will see the continent picking up. And of course, we need to change the narrative of blocks. We need to look at how we can trade, how we can really put in place all the blocks that the Africa Free Trade, the Continental Free Trade Agreement rest on: movement of people, movement of good, movement of services. I think this is where we will see the future going. But definitely I agree with Woku that the cost of transport across the continent has to be looked into, because this will be a big deterrent onto the emergence of the continent as a market of 1.2 billion people. So we need to do something about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me say that, Landry, you wanted to jump in. Please go ahead.
That is a really fabulous, Excellency, and thank you to all also for your very kind words. So one thing that I wanted to add is that, and as pointed out by Excellency, the African Continental Free Trade Area, its implementation, its successful implementation, will constitute an exceptional tool to really accelerate Africa's recovery. And in addition of reducing the cost of doing business, or to increasing supply network, improving supply networks or domestic demands, I think it will be critical on the short run that government avoid, or at least limited areas to private firms from the public sector. So they should provide instead finance for the private sector to save jobs, which are critical to unlock Africa potential. And they should, of course, provide tax waivers or extended deadlines. Some governments have already done that. But one aspect that we sometimes overlook is also the worker from the informal sector. So which represent about, depending on the countries, about 70% on average on the continent of the working population. So it will be critical for government to maintain household consumption among the bottom 75 to 80% of household who have very limited savings and therefore offer quite often services and products in the informal sector to the worker of the formal sector, whether from the public or private sector. So protect the income of human wage and salary employees and protect health of human and formal sector workers. I think government should declare, and that's aligned also with what Worku and Excellency said, they should even declare transport of food from farm to get to market as an essential service.
I think Laundry, if I may, I have to put my hat of woman again here. You've mentioned the informal sector, and yet the informal sector are dominated by women, and they tend to be the first in, and of course the first out, the last in and the first out into the system. So we need to put money in the hands of these women so that they can precisely drive, because the economy of Africa, many countries, it is still dependent on the informal economy. So we need to put money, yes, I agree with you, in the hands, but we need to have a special thought for our women folk, because they feed the family, they do the agriculture, they do most of the burden of the work. So I'm sorry, I can't resist not saying that.
Absolutely agree.
I know that many of CCA's members are very focused on the US-Kenya talks, not just because it's Kenya, but also because we see it as a building block for how the US can enhance its trade investment relationship with our African partners, going beyond AGOA, which has been sort of a one-way unilateral program, to something that's more reciprocal and something that really takes account of Africa's increasing role in the global economy. And I think that, you know, there's so many that recognize that Africa really is the place to invest. It is the place that holds incredible opportunities, and how to harvest those. This is the importance of programs like Prosper Africa and the work that you all are doing, and especially focusing on women through your 2X program. And I just wanted to go back to Her Excellency. I don't know how much more time we have, but you know, one of the questions that we have is about the emergence of new players in Africa, such as China, India, Brazil, who are obviously competing with US for business on the continent. And I wondered if you could share a little bit of your thoughts of how Mauritius looks at that, how African countries look at that, or should look at that, in terms of the range of players in the African market now.
Thank you, Flory. This is a very interesting question because we have seen precisely a multitude of actors. You know, you mentioned China. We have seen recently, of course, the UAE and many of the Arab countries as well, very, very interested in very key areas. And well, we know we welcome partnership, as I said, we welcome investment. But I think the key word to take ahead, I think this is something that we'd like to bring forward, is exchange of good practices, more partnership. And, you know, if you look at, for example, what China is doing in terms of, Laundry rightly mentioned the fourth industrial revolution, we'd like to see more of these exchanges happening, but we increasingly would like to see more partnership, because we do not want yet another scramble for Africa. Having said this, one area that I would like to see more partnership, and of course more revival on the African continent. You know, Landry also mentioned this in his book. Africa is home to 60% of the world's arable land. Wow. And if you look at the country of the size of China, it's only 9%. And, and yet there is so much that this continent can provide in terms of support. But over and above this, we need to see, again, I go back to what the African Development Bank has been saying, how this sector, if only for agriculture, can be a fast-growing sector. We are sitting, as I said, over $1 trillion business, $1 trillion business, how it can be a source of jobs as well for our youth, how we can make Africa agriculture become an entrepreneurial sector that can absorb so much of our youth who was out there. And we are the youngest continent on this planet up until 2050. We are going to be the supplier of labor force to the world. So how do we put all these together? So again, we are, the emergence of the continent, the food security of this planet, or many of the regions we just mentioned, will rest at the nexus of us investing in that space as well. So I see, so many of these, the intersection of governance, the intersection of agriculture, the intersection of new technology, so that we see Africa prosper. But again,
Wonderful.
it depends on how much we put our hands in our pocket, the investment.
Absolutely. Thank you, Your Excellency. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Landry. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Brookings. Cool. We look forward to working with you to continue advancing U.S.-Africa trade, investment, and business engagement. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Flory. Thank you for the great sharing. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.